and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Like a stranger knocking at the door. Politicians lie, they always try when they ask me. I like that, but John open apple pie. Then the runner they call was the rotten side, while I bet in the nation's ritual heights. It angers me to see such fools that fall for such fools as these. Who try to rewrite our history, now they're bumping their fists in victory. Engineering, economic slavery, betting on reading Jesus. Heaven help us all.
This is Bob Fitrakis bringing you the other side of the news with my cohort.
The other guy on the other side of the news, although usually we're on the same side, but the other guy, Dan Dougan here. We've got a special guest, and we heard some music by this special guest, Happy Chichester. And it's a newer disc that Harold or Happy has. And that song was, Bob, would you care to tell
Knocking at the door.
Knocking at the door, yes.
And again, these people knocking at the door seem to be, the huddled masses, workers, perhaps soldiers, people that are hurt. Not the oligarchs. Ain't the oligarchs knocking on the door here for another tax break?
You seem to have really gotten it. Thank you. Thanks for playing the song, too.
They're the ones on the inside where we need to get, right? So in current events, I think we've all been glued to Attorney General Snitty's appearance before the committee, or Bob Barr. The Attorney General of the United States appeared in front of the Senate yesterday, but did not appear in front of the Senate or in front of the House committee today being Thursday when we tape the show. So, Bob, my big question, because we talked about this before, when the Attorney General failed to appear under the subpoena that demanded his appearance, is that a legality in our society? I know the president can't be forced to appear. Can the Attorney General?
Well,
what do you think?
There's a lot of stuff that used to be, well known. Like,
right.
Of course, the Attorney General Barr, chief law enforcement officer, can be brought before Congress because Congress has oversight responsibility.
Right. Just as they brought the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton
spelled out
for
in
weeks
the
at a time.
Constitution. Right. It was clear when the Republicans were bringing Hillary Clinton before him. You're absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole lot of new thought, again, which comes out of this unified executive concepts of the presidency, which really came out of Dick Cheney and his attorney, David Addison. And the notion is it's what you used to think was illegal and couldn't be done is not legal until the courts say it's illegal, like torture, right?
Right.
It was understood the United States was the first country in the world that outlawed torture in its Constitution, the Eighth Amendment. It was just assumed you wouldn't torture. It wasn't assumed you would redefine torture and say it's only torture if a major body organ fails. And then you would say, well, let's take it to the court. So the assumption is, of course, they can subpoena Attorney General Barr.
They can subpoena him, but does he have to appear?
No one has to appear, but they have options, and one is to charge him with contempt. But I don't think they're willing to do that. So, and again, I don't know what Happy makes of this stuff, but
I think it's crazy that political considerations and teeth grinding always go before constitutional duty nowadays, and it's just so nauseating. Sorry to say. Buck up, put some starch in your spines, and start
What are you
defending
afraid of,
the
right?
Constitution like your oath said you would do.
Right. I mean, he sat yesterday for a Republican-dominated Senate committee and called Mueller snitty, amongst other things, and, belittled and put, as they continue to do, to try to take away the importance of the Mueller report. But he wouldn't show up today. I mean, it's amazing. So we'll have to find out sometime in the future if in fact he's going to be made to show up. Mueller will be there in a few weeks, right, Dr. Bob? Isn't that correct?
Hopefully that's the plan. Mm-hmm. So this Happy. I mean, this song is, well, in my mind, it's clearly political. I mean, I don't mean interest groups lobby money, but notions. It's almost like, to some extent, class conflict or people with power dealing without, and people without power. Why are you moving in this direction at this time? Even though you've always been political, you've always written a lot of letters to the editor. I think you've got a lot more published than I've ever had.
This song was written during the Obama years, but we've seen a lot of this coming.
Which tells us something.
There's 60 million refugees worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
people who have had to flee their homes from a variety of things, mostly conflicts, drought, environmental things. It's something that the world's got to come to grips with. And sadly, at this time, democracy around the world is getting pummeled. And it mostly deals with that. And at first, I thought this kind of overtly political song might not have much of a shelf life. But as I reflected on really the larger picture, I thought, no, this issue is not going away. And so this it's okay to put out this song.
Same struggle. The players change. Or actually, to back up to something that Happy had sung with the Royal Crescent Mob, one of my favorite Columbus bands. I won't be holding the bag, choo-choo Charlie, when the corporation enema comes down. Right, Hap? That's beautiful stuff. But anyway.
Thank you, man.
So, yeah, from way back, this guy has been a musician activist and part of our community. But, you're right. It's the same sort of, we're seeking to be let in to the power alleys.
Yeah, and that's an important message to remind people of, that people do have the power, but only to the extent that they use it and can organize that power into focused issues and movements. And by nature, politicians are cowards. And so we, the people, have to really just, push them to act out of fear, sadly, because one of the four freedoms is freedom from fear. I've been thinking about FDR's four freedoms a lot.
And why don't you go over those for the listening audience? The four freedoms, which now virtually disappeared from dialogue, as well as statements like economic royalists, which he used to denounce the rich in the United States.
Yeah, well, the four freedoms, as he put to Congress in 1941, freedom of speech, which most people sort of take for granted, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And those ideas in 2019 seem to be too radical to garner the sorts of political will that would actually codify them. And that's sort of a ironic thing, being the land of the free and all that stuff. It's, really, if you think about freedom from want and freedom from fear, I think most Americans would have a real hard time imagining that in 2019. Particularly, we could argue we have a fearmonger as president.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right-wing populist movements usually
Scares
are
me.
always stoked. They're not stoked by an analysis of the system and who has power. Usually it's some ethnic group, some racial group, some new immigrant that is targeted primarily for imagined sins.
Yeah, and sadly, he's merely the symptom. It's really like it's the result of decades of right-wing propaganda and fear-mongering. He's just, I think he's the inevitable result of patronage government. When money equals speech, then of course you get a fraud for president who's a fake billionaire. That seems inevitable to me.
Well, in that case, I take it you're not enamored with Citizens United?
No, or McCutcheon. No, I think that they are disastrous. I mean, really, that's the gateway drug for billionaires to turn into fascists.
But is money free speech? Which side are you on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if money was speech, then...
What do you got in your pocket there, baby?
Can you hear me? No, it's radio silence, and I'm holding a $5 bill up to the microphone. You can't hear anything. I mean, money is just like what you use it for, and sadly, mothers who don't have the ability to put their kids in daycare while they're working, they don't have money to pay for lobbyists to go and help them, with the government.
We want to remind people you're listening to the community radio station WGRN, the Green Renaissance, at 94.1.
As well as WCRS.
There you go, at 92.7, 98.3. And you can find us at WGRN.org. So, and we're talking with Happy Chichester about all kinds of things, his music, his career. But I'd kind of like to know a little bit. I want to shift gears a bit. So have you been touring much? Or
No, much less touring. I've still traveled a lot. I played in New York more than I played in Columbus last year.
Your wife Laura was ill, so that might have taken you off the road.
She's been ill, so I've been wanting to be around home. She's doing a little better now, thankfully.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for all the well wishes and good thoughts and stuff.
All right.
But yeah, I've been still playing and writing and recording, but just not traveling quite as much.
Happy joined us for our benefit last week where we raised some money for this community radio station because there's no major corporations lining up yet to help us out. So anyway.
To your credit.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. So in other big news, we can look south of the border all the way down to Venezuela. Another attempt by the U.S. government to get the military to overthrow the existing government and put their hand-picked guy in. What do you see down there, Dr. Bob, and for the future?
Well, the oddest thing is the U.S. is backing a guy for president who didn't run for president.
Mm-hmm.
And,
right.
And they've lined up about 54 nations out of 200. So,
and he's a white guy, pretty much, of
yeah.
Spanish blood in a pretty much brown country, right?
Sure. If you always pay attention to the skin color, who's mixed race, who's indigenous, and who is part of the conquistadors. Mm-hmm. And this guy's the light-skinned guy. But you're in a situation that is, it's Venezuela is the largest possessor of heavy crude, not light, sweet stuff that bubbles up, but heavy crude. And sadly, they weren't thinking well, right, because it was really easy to destroy their economy. They grabbed Citgo and the gas and the money and the assets in the situation, a well-known gas station chain here. I mean, that was owned, again, by Venezuela. And the other factor, the refineries that they need for the heavy crude, a couple of them are owned by the Koch brothers. So talk about the ability to strangle an economy. And really, it's payback to Hugo Chavez for refinancing loans in the third world, right? The United States has always believed since Bretton Woods in 1944, we're the world's currency. We have a right to rip off poor and developing countries in the South. So, Happy's got plenty of material, and it keeps repeating itself.
Am I correct that Hugo Chavez survived an assassination attempt by the Bush administration?
Yeah, and a coup. They actually, the Canadian Broadcast Network was there interviewing him, and Greg Pallas, who is working for the BBC, is down there. We have a couple tapes in the house. So people should look at this. But really, the Canadian Broadcasting Network, as they're doing a routine interview, and suddenly there's a U.S.-backed coup. And it's really the most incredible failed coup attempt in history because the people pour out into the streets, tens of thousands, and surround the new government. So they surround the new government, and the people there are talking to the palace guard, right, and saying, look, your job is to protect the president and the Constitution. Go in there and arrest the coup makers. So they're in there. They've taken Hugo Chavez. They've flown him out to a small island where he gets a cell phone. One of the soldiers, just rank-and-file soldiers who really loves him, he's incredibly popular, gives him a cell phone. He calls Greg Palast to fly in from the BBC, and he calls people and says, they've got me under, the small island, right? It's under U.S. military. And then the amazing thing is they actually, Chavez hid, because he knew it was coming, some troops in the basement of the palace. So they actually come out and begin to arrest the people doing the illegal coup. And it's all caught on tape.
Wow.
It's really one of the most remarkable documentaries I've ever
Thank goodness
seen.
for incompetence.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, the whole thing is, it's really kind of U.S. arrogance. It's like, when's the last, usually you pick someone who's corrupt, right? When we set up a government in Afghanistan, Happy, you get some opium warlords. We call them warlords because we don't want the opium part.
Yeah.
Right.
And the Karzai brothers.
Right, the oil guy, right? Yeah. And you run them and you rig the election, and it's what's called a demonstration democracy. You've had a public demonstration that a democracy occurred. In this case, it's just like, hey, the real light-skinned guy, descendant of the conquistadors, he's our guy. He didn't run for president, but he declared himself president, claiming there was a vacuum. But there was no vacuum.
I thought it was kind of ironic when the White House was talking about their problems with Maduro. It was an illegitimate election, and he hasn't responded enough to humanitarian crisis. And I thought of Puerto Rico in the 2016 election.
Well, he lost. Didn't Maduro lose by 3 million votes? No, that was
yeah.
That was Trump.
It's so
there you go. All right. No, and it goes way back. Somoza and Duarte and all these dictators down in the Latin American countries, as they're called. We continue to mess with them. I'm continually invaded Nicaragua, way back in 1909. We were invading there, and all the way back to the Monroe Doctrine that we're going to mess with your country.
And in Venezuela, as to quote Neil Young, Cortez. What a killer. One of the greatest guitar albums ever.
My brother and I were playing that in my parents' basement.
Great album.
Way back.
That is a great
Back
album.
when I was
Absolutely.
a rock reviewer, that was one of my favorites.
Which one of these times we're going to talk about those days, too.
Well, that's how I started sports and rock reviews.
I know. I want to hear more about this time. And you were in Ann Arbor, right?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Ann Arbor. It was
mostly Detroit.
Grand
Yeah.
Rapids.
Detroit. Yeah.
But, our political base was in Ann Arbor. We had a human rights party there. So
Wow, what a place. When we were playing Apollo's, the old dive bar on the South Campus, remember
Classic.
Apollo's,
Yeah,
classic
you
dive
get
bar.
a Euro and you could watch live rock bands.
No, I didn't recognize him. It was B. Our
Greasy
guitarist
bar,
who
though.
schooled me, but John Sinclair came to one of those shows.
Wow, yeah. I met
John,
John a couple times.
John backed me when I ran for governor of Ohio in 2006. Had my T-shirt, came in for the community festival.
Yeah, he also had managed the MC5 and
and
poet
we used to hang out at a place called Rainbow Farms, where the FBI later shot the two guys that ran the farm. But John started this tradition where just to make sure he would do the Cannabis Cup countdown. And for the record, I don't like to do illegal stuff. I did. We started at 10. I think it was White Widow. Number 9 was Juicy Fruit, and then I had to drop out. And I had to rethink my position on whether pot should be legal. I don't know what the THC content, but John was still unfazed.
Wow.
But John Sinclair, who did 10 years, man. John
In the Stir
Sinclair.
for Breathing Air.
In the
right?
Stir for Breathing Air. Yeah, the
John Lennon sang it.
Perhaps not as good as the MC5, but they did have the John Sinclair song.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're coming towards the end of the show, so I wanted to just give a shout out there. Go Jackets, right? We're a hockey town now, so we had to throw that out there. But also, we want to announce that the Free Press Network is now on Patreon. And you, yes, you listening, can help us by becoming a patron. Support WGRN and at www.patreon.com, Free Press Network. So
Okay,
whatever you can do to help us
3
stay on
minutes,
the air.
I want to give Happy time to say whatever you want to say to our listening audience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right.
3
There you go.
minutes? Well, thank
So,
you first
you can always
for
ask a
having me. I'm
question.
really honored to be part of your show. And I don't really have a whole lot to say because I'm just a musician. But I follow.
But you're really much more than that. As you're probably, there's different types of musicians, and many of them, of course, the great Bob Dylan, and I would put Neil Young in that category, really have captured the social historic events of the day.
Oh, I think that it's down to a lot of musicians to carry that tradition forward, and it is still going forward.
What Bob said earlier, which side are you on? I mean, it really.
Well, we know what
you
side
know.
Happy's on. People
Well, no,
say-
I mean for musicians in general,
Yeah.
they try. You can't just ignore it. We don't live in a vacuum, So
They will try to silence
Yeah.
those voices of dissent, and they still do. So you just keep going, and people, you have the power. Call your congressman and just gently persuade them to do the right thing. It's your power. It's this air that you're hearing these words over. This belongs to you. The land belongs to you.
And every time I check it, the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment is free speech, right?
It's the First Amendment because it's the most cherished of our U.S. ideals. Freedom of
Absolutely.
speech. Those people who don't understand that Colin Kaepernick embodies freedom
Right.
and freedom
It's
of
the
speech.
personification
He's the personification.
of
He's
everything
standing
the First
up.
Amendment's about.
How dare he kneel in this
And one of
Christian
the four
country.
freedoms, right? And all he makes
Exactly. No, he embodies those freedoms in the U.S., the most cherished of our freedoms. He's not a bad guy. He's a good guy.
And again, to this day, it's whenever I can, I buy a Dixie Chick album because they were willing to say stuff at a time when virtually nobody was.
And courage, it does cost you a little bit, but it's worth it. You have to. Everybody, and many hands make light work. So stand up for your freedom. Stand up for your rights.
Have you ever been
Before it's too late.
had fans or people come up and say, "I don't like what you're doing politically"?
Sometimes when I write letters to the dispatch, I
I've
do get
seen those.
I get
Great.
some hate mail. I've gotten some hate phone calls and some hate mail. It upsets my wife, but it doesn't bother me too much, really.
I think one of those was Monty Temple and Toohey just screwing around with you. One of those hate calls. But anyway, from the Stash's Happy Hour. But anyway, go ahead.
Good old Monty. Yeah, no. The thing that upsets me the most now is the family separations, and if you're not moved by that, to act and call
And
your
now the
congressman.
kids have come out and sexual exploitation as well. It's just unthinkable.
And one child in the news, he just died while in custody.
Just recently, and
All right.
the kids are being traumatized. These are health things that are going to affect them for the rest of their lives, and it's sickening.
All of this and the above you will find on this radio station, WGRN Community Radio, the Green Renaissance. This has been The Other Side of the News. Dr. Bob, Happy Chichester.
Thanks, Happy.
Thank you, Dan Dougan. Thank you, Dr. Bob.
See you.
Right. Thanks for listening to The Other Side of the News. This is Bob Fitrakis.
And Dan Dougan, WGRN 94.1 LPFM, the Green Renaissance.